Just a heads up, this episode does feature some colourful language. Kia ora koutou. Tama here once again to welcome you all to the final episode of the summer season of Pod Uni. Although at this point I suppose we could call it the autumn season, but never mind. In this episode, Colin interviews Kirsten, Johnstone and Melody Thomas of PopSock Media. PopSock is a podcast production company known for their impactful and engaging approach to storytelling, particularly in the true crime narrative genre. They've been around since 2020, and in that short space of time they've produced several awesome projects. These include True Justice, a 5-part podcast series sharing the stories of those who have been through our prison systems in Aotearoa, and the multi-award-winning series The Lake, from which we actually have a clip to share with you during the interview. Over and out.
Kia ora, I'm Kirsten Johnstone. I am a co-director of PopSock Media, which is a podcast production company that we started in, 2020?
Yeah, I think the year that the shit hit the fan is when we started PopSock. I'm Melody Thomas and I'm the other director of PopSock Media.
Kia ora. Glad you're here. Tell me, what's the story of PopSock? How did it come to be?
So both of us, Melody and I, met at RNZ a long time ago.
RNZ, for anyone not from New Zealand, is the New Zealand state radio broadcaster. Yep.
Yeah, so Melody was maybe about, 22 or something when I met her, and
Kirsten was terrifying. I asked her recently what she remembers about me from that time, her first memory, and she said, "Your moisturiser was cloying." But it's all right.
She always brings this up.
I know, it's because I love it. It's our dynamic. I love it. I like to please, and it took me a long time to win you over, but I got there in the end.
Yeah, I think my tact is could always do with a little more work, and Melody's very good at pointing out, some of my tactless moments. But anyway,
then we love that because you always get to the grid of the question that I steer around. So anyway, as you can, please continue.
I'm direct. Anyway, so I'd been at RNZ since I was, basically a baby. I think I was about 24 when I started at RNZ. I went in there with a degree in playing the flute.
Excellent.
Yeah. And a little bit of post-production TV experience, and went in there to file CDs for concert. And slowly worked my way up to, hosting a music show on RNZ. And that's when I met Melody. But yeah, I'd been there for about 16 years. It just kind of flew by, as it does when you end up with your dream job in your 20s. And it was kind of no longer
your dream job.
My dream job. Yeah. I just needed to be doing something else. And
I had already left.
Yeah.
I was a contractor through this whole period. I never held a permanent position at RNZ, but I was there for 10 years. People believed that I was permanent, and I did that on purpose. Was just always in the building for when opportunities came up. And a lot of that was at RNZ Music as well. But eventually they established a podcast department well after the rest of the world, did an internal call for pitches, and I put forward a pitch for a podcast, and that kind of set me off on my own. That got accepted, and that set me off on my podcast journey.
What was that podcast?
So that, I figured we'd get there, but that was Bang. That's a sex and sexuality podcast. That did really well through RNZ, set me up as like cool, I can do this, and I really enjoy this. And but then I was always kind of, when that wrapped, I wasn't within the institution with another job to go back to. I had to kind of figure out where to from there, and that was just around the same time that you were going, what am I going to do now? Yeah, and maybe it's time for the next thing.
And I think we'd kind of joked about setting up our own business, our own podcast production company, but I didn't know that I actually had the guts to do it until I was actually forced to think about what I wanted to do. And what I came to was, I don't want to have a boss. anymore. I am tired of that, and I just need to push myself out of my comfort zone, and we need to do our own thing. So,
and it was kind of desperate times a little as well. Like, it's not just
it
like,
was the middle of a pandemic.
It was the time,
Right.
middle of the pandemic, like changes going on at RNZ, and it was like you either stay on or you take the redundancy, which actually was an opportunity in the end. But it was everything was up in the air. It was all pretty scary. And I think I don't think I would have ever thought that I could do this either, except maybe, I mean, partly it's because when Kirsten says you're doing something, you just are doing it.
Direct.
But direct. But also, and I trust her, so I'll go where she's going to go. But a year or two previously, I'd been to the Work It Women's Podcast Festival in New York. I crowdfunded to get there and then had a scholarship to go. And I remember someone up there talking about when is the time to strike out on your own, and I don't think I ever would have even entertained it as a possibility if I hadn't seen someone up there saying that. So the seed was planted then, so that when Kirsten came along and said maybe we do this, even though I was scared and unsure and had been used to being within this organization with other people kind of leading me, I was like, all right, maybe we can. Yeah. And we
it's been wildly successful in terms of the awards you've won, certainly.
Yes, definitely looks. There's some gold shiny things that just not in our bank account. Nah, there's some money, but there can always be more of that. But yes, the awards have been great.
Yeah. Oh, terrific. And so tell me, what's it like? What's it like to work for a media production company like PopSock compared to the larger media production companies and RNZ stuff, et cetera?
Isn't it so good? Mostly so good.
Well, I obviously have the best workmate possible. I think our work culture is really healthy.
Yes.
It is.
No toxic behavior at all.
No, and we get along. Like I mean, we've had tiny stressy bits, but we've really we work together so well, and to the point where if I get sick is when she, we kind of tag team illness so that we can continue to. I don't even know how we do it. Yeah, and our strengths when it comes to the different parts of the job, we can, because we came up through RNZ, we can kind of do all the parts of the job, the editing or writing or whatever. But our strengths and our interests are slightly, are different components that complement each other as well.
Yeah, so I think we, on our first project, we definitely were feeling our way as to how we would split up these duties. The first commission we had was actually from Sony Music, who wanted a 3-part podcast to celebrate 10 years since Brooke Fraser's landmark album Flags came out. So, it was basically, we decided that Melody was going to present it. We put her in my kid's cupboard with some duvets, with this new nice gear that we'd just bought.
New nice gear, but we still didn't have really what we needed. We were still recording into a sound device, not straight into a laptop because we had no interface. It was still a very roundabout process.
Yeah. And
not very glamorous.
The interviews with Brooke Fraser were done on, she was recording in LA on her AirPods and a voice memo. So
it was surprisingly
and it was actually
decent
pretty good
audio.
Yeah.
And we later did win an award that specifically mentioned our the production values of the podcast.
Well done, duvet in the cupboard.
Exactly.
But yeah, as far as splitting out duties, I mean, I'm maybe a little nerdier on the gear and the technology than Melody is, and Melody definitely loves the writing and the structure and things like that. So that's where our strengths are. I'm on the editing, sound design, and she's on the writing and script.
Yeah, I still do love the editing, but I'm very happy for you to take the most of that on. And sound design, we're both geeks for all the things, but it naturally does work that you'll do more editing and I'll do more structure story.
Complementary that way.
I think
your skill sets.
Yeah. But then also if I'm overwhelmed, you can pick up, and if you're overwhelmed, I can do some editing. So it's great like that. I think, but sorry, do you want to keep going before I? Well, I was just thinking, the whole House PopSock going all sounds wonderful, and it is so wonderful, but the hard part is the hustle.
It's the hustle. It's the constantly having to think up new ideas and trying to pick the right ones that might match what funders are looking for. We're constantly having that in the back of our on the Trello board.
And we are currently, because probably because of the kinds of projects we're interested in, because of our public radio background, and just because we're more familiar in the territory we're currently sitting in, and less in, say, commercial podcasts, or we are reliant on funding bodies currently to a degree that I think, that's something we're working on, is not to be as reliant on our survival, not be as reliant on other people's good grace.
It's not a great business model.
Yeah, it's not. It means we make some really rewarding projects, and when the money does come through, and you do, it's amazing. Like the project we're working on right now, I keep going to, when I book accommodation, being like, I'll stay with a friend, and then be like, no, like you can book a nice hotel, you can get an Uber.
Is this Good Sex Project?
But it's still quite foreign for me. And then also the other thing about that is that you put so much work into developing pitches, into getting them over the line, and then unless it's successful, that's unpaid work.
Yeah, right.
So that part is hard. We had a hard half of the year this year, because we just had some weird contract negotiations and COVID stuff that pushed us over. And then we had a period where we were like, oh, we don't have anything right now. We have other things. But yeah, like navigating that so you're not either completely overwhelmed with work or in like a drought is one of the challenges.
And you're implying that there was less of those kinds of challenges at like an RNZ or a
Well, you've just got a salary.
You've got a salary.
You got the salary. You're still doing
pay.
pitches. You're still trying to find the next story, but you've probably got a wider pipeline, and you don't have to worry about the monthly bills in that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's that.
Yeah.
It's paying your rent or yeah.
So tell me about the tagline, beautiful and impactful storytelling, which I quite like for PopSock Media. How did you choose that?
I don't remember, do you?
It was probably your way with words.
It just is I don't know how we got to those words. It could have been. We have used an NPR audio project blueprint quite a bit when you've got that kind of gold kernel of an idea that you know is something, but you need to refine it down to what it really is and who it's really for. And there's a kind of worksheet you work through, and then you take those keywords and turn it into a mission statement. So it could have been something that kind of came from that, or was off the back of us having done that, is how we came up with the words. But it is just a really good description of what we like to do. Beautiful because it's audio rich, it's layered, it's immersive, all of those things, and we want we want people to be impacted. And I think it's the dream projects all have those components to them.
I'm going to ask about. I like beautiful and impactful because I think the impactful element gets overlooked a lot in my opinion, I suppose. And I don't know. Have you all listened by any chance to the Trojan Horse Affair, the serial production? I
listened to about 4 episodes of it, and then somehow I lost it. I think I just had too many podcasts to listen to that.
Yeah, I think what was interesting to me there is that so Brian Reed and Hamza Syed are telling this story about this this whole kerfuffle in the UK that's centering around Islamophobia, and they have the two hosts, Brian Reed and Hamza Syed, have a different approach to their storytelling. Brian Reed, traditional trained journalist, is like, I just want to tell good stories. Good ass stories is what he says. But Hamza Syed's like, no, I need to tell stories that are impactful, that are going to change the way our society works for justice is essentially what he's aiming for. And they disagree over that. And I think that's like an interesting moment. And that's, I don't know. So I
feel like they want the same thing. I feel like an impactful story is a good story, or a good story can't help but have an impact. Don't you think? I feel like they're arguing over the same. It's semantics.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Are those always the same thing? Are beautiful stories also impactful, and impactful always beautiful, or are there times when they're in tension with each other?
I get what Hamza's saying about the impact, societally. I mean, a couple of the stories that we've told have been impactful in that way, I think. Or, at least they've been impactful on me,
And the people who have listened, I would say, a lot of the people who have listened as well, yeah. I mean, you want to be changing policy, etc., but that might not necessarily be what happens.
But I think, narrative podcasts can be super impactful. I mean, working with Aaron Smale on the Lake, he's a long-form journalist. He can, spin out 13,000 words, and feel good about that, and that's fantastic. and he can win awards for that. But but the audience is kind of tiny, and there isn't the same impact. When we put out The Lake, he got so many people, so much feedback, just like incredible emails, saying how he's, changed their minds on various things, or, just how much those stories meant to them. And I think he noticed like the difference.
But isn't that part, and that is partly because of the beauty of the medium, I think. We weren't just telling the story of like, hey, here's this thing that happened at this time, it was horrible. You had two characters that you instantly fell in love with, that you followed through the whole thing. There was sound design that fully immersed you in the feelings that those children would have felt at the time. I think, all of the medium really lends itself to being impactful if you use it right.
Do we need to back up and explain what The Lake is?
Yeah, actually, I was actually hoping that question would be a segue into true crime podcasting. So you read my mind, Kirsten. Why don't you go ahead and explain The Lake? Voyager award-winning.
Voyager's New York Festival
Yes, New York
just
Festival.
got silver in some Asian digital media competition that I don't know the name of.
So many awards, we're losing track of the titles.
It's amazing.
I reckon I know, but the scary thing at the Voyagers, because we were nominated for 2 awards, I thought we'd win 1 and we won 2, and I was like, well, this is our peak. This is it.
And then New York was after that, wasn't it?
I think
No,
New York
that
was
was-
before
New
that,
York was
but Voyager, New York was amazing. Obviously, it's a huge deal, but Voyager, New York as well. I know we're explaining The Lake, but New York is, if it's gold worthy, you get a gold. There's not just one. Voyager, you're on home ground. Everyone you're kind of up against and also in support of are your kind of peers, and then there's just one award. So it felt extra special, I think, to us. Yeah.
So The Lake is about the Lake Alice Psychiatric Institution that was open from, I think, the late 60s until the 1990s. But in the 1970s, there was a unit in there that housed teenagers and children from the age of the youngest that we've heard of was 4 years old. It was overseen by a shadowy psychiatrist named Selwyn Leeks, and he was really into his electroshock therapy as aversion therapy. And I mean, you have to listen to the podcast, but it was nothing therapeutic about it. It was just punishment, and like the overwhelming majority of the kids that were in there were Māori boys who were wards of the state. So the state was their parent. I mean, it's an incredible story. Anyway, we teamed up with Aaron Smale, who's an incredible Māori journalist who had already formed relationships with a couple of the people who had gone through Lake Alice.
Quite a few of them, really, but a couple with the core.
And
Tyrone and Rongi.
and who are just these incredible characters who have been through so much but still retain their humour, their cheekiness,
mischievousness.
And their friendship is super strong because they have, they went through so much from the time they were 10 years old.
Yeah, they were the, when you're looking at this, I think it was definitely Kirsten who was like, I think there's a podcast in this, and when you initially look at it, it's like, oh, this is abuse in state care, abuse of children. It's really tough material, but then the moment you have a Tyrone and a Rangi, you know that it's possible because they are just so charismatic, and you can't help but care for them and want to know what happened to them.
But also, it had an evil doctor. It had
car chases.
Yes. It
escapes.
It had the Scientologists.
Yes, it did.
You're right.
Which made the documents much more palatable to go through in the garage.
Oh my gosh.
But I think, my favorite subgenre of true crime is the one where the state is the villain.
Like the Canadian ones?
Yeah, so there's a Canadian woman,
Connie Walker.
Connie Walker,
Yep.
who has done amazing
She's terrific.
work, finding out what happened to Indigenous girls who went missing. The last series was actually about her dad, who went through
Stolen. Was it?
Stolen, who went through something very similar to our state care system, went through the religious schools in Canada, part of the, what do they call it?
I've forgotten the name.
The 60s sweeps or...
Yeah, I've forgotten the name now.
Anyway, so her father was abused in these institutions, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, these stories about, just how much the institutions and the state were complicit in the abuse of these kids.
And more countries. It feels like one comes out and then you're like, oh, surprise, surprise, it happened in Australia too. Or
Yeah. And then...
Why do you like the state as a villain?
I don't know. I guess it's just my...
Read my mind. That's what I was going to ask.
It's just my... I don't know. Is it my upbringing disrespecting authority?
Yeah, I wonder if that's part of it for me as well, as the mistrust of authority.
Yeah.
And also
not
the feeling...
actively disrespecting
I think as well,
authority,
it's like...
what I mean,
it's
but
like when
mistrust, maybe.
That's why you started your own business.
When an institution holds enough power to, to not only sway outcomes, but also to kind of keep that stuff under wraps and then be in charge of telling the story, I think there's something really empowering about showing the other side or amplifying the other side of the story and uncovering that.
Yeah,
there's another one that I've just listened to called The Greatest Menace,
I don't know that one.
an Australian one, which is on Audible, though it's not under the paywall because it's, for the greater good that it gets listened to, but it's about Australia's gay prison experiment, which happened in the late 50s, early 60s. And that's incredible storytelling in so many ways. But yeah, kind of the state is the villain.
Yeah. So, let's unpack that a little more, right? So you're making a distinction between traditional true crime and then this subgenre you're calling it where the state is the villain rather than a single individual psychopath who we try to penetrate their consciousness and understand how could one bad person be that way. What elements of true crime remain the same across both of those genres for you that are still powerful? And then what are the key differences other than maybe if there are any other differences other than the flipping who the bad guy is?
I think, the storytelling has to be gripping. You have to lead people through.
Yeah.
You're not going to pull people into a, state as villain podcast by,
giving them all the information up front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
you need to have their understanding slowly unfold over the series. For example, the state's not the only villain. We've also got Dr. Selwyn Leeks. And at first, he's not necessarily a villain because at the time, he at least managed to convince a bunch of people with psychiatry being a relatively new frontier that what he was doing was justified within his field or whatever. So, you have to have your listeners starting at that point and then slowly have the understanding unfold of what was, of actually the people around being like, oh, maybe this isn't... What I'm trying to say is I think, that thing that hooks you in with true crime where you don't know what's going on at the beginning and then you slowly start to piece it together over the thing. You need that.
The penny drops.
Yeah. Yeah, the concentric circles of understanding.
Ooh.
I think, did we steal that from Adam Dudding at Stuff?
Yeah.
Does that tell us about the concentric circles of understanding?
It's basically that, but it's quite hard it's those things where you, you might level up your understanding within one episode and then think you've got it. And then in the next episode, you're like, oh, actually, oh, wow. And you just, as the thing progresses, you understand more and more, but it's quite hard as a producer of a podcast like that to unknow what you already know. So there's this tricky thing you have to do where, you have to basically break down, at the beginning they're going to think this and by the end they're going to understand this and here's how we're going to get them here. We're going to take them this little step in this step, this little step in next step. And it's this, concentric rings of understanding. So you break down your themes and what you want people to learn. And you might have, 8 of those threads and then you're mapping where people are going to be along the way.
Yeah, so for the lake, I mean, that first episode, we really wanted to keep it to what the boys knew, and very much see things from their point of view. And we didn't expand it out much more than that. Their little 10, 11-year-old worlds, we wanted to keep it within that. Second episode, you're expanding out a little bit more to see that it's this whole system of residences, and it's not just these two little boys, it's
a whole
hundreds.
Generation of children.
And then by the third episode, when we come up to sort of 1977, when the case is busted open to the public. So it's gathering all of the things that the public were told at that time. But then in the fourth episode, it's like, here are all these fucking atrocious things that you were never told.
Yeah.
And that
so you
realization that, like, you think we've dealt with Lake Alice because we paid them $25,000 dollars in 1996, whatever it was. I have lost the details, but actually that wasn't enough, because this is what these kids went through and saw and experienced, and no amount of money is ever going to make up for this.
But also give them more money.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But
also, like, more money would not hurt.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely by the end of the seventh episode, you're realizing how complicit the state has been in kind of covering this up and not wanting to compensate these kids for what they went through.
Yeah, or not wanting to take ownership, because that means they then have to follow through with compensation.
Right. Yeah.
I like the idea of concentric circles rather than a linear line, because I feel like sometimes, especially in traditional true crime storytelling, you can go one episode and think, oh, this person's definitely the villain, and the next episode, oh no, that person's definitely innocent, and villain and innocent. You just sort of just like toggle back and forth between this binary understanding of like guilty, innocent, which is like, I'm thinking of the very first Serial, right? And it's just kind of like, okay, I get. Yeah, but it doesn't seem as rich of a narrative. I think there's a lot that was missed in that first season of Serial. And I think that thinking of it as expanding circles helps you understand how those initial things that you learn in those early episodes are actually tied into a larger web.
It's like building on, rather than replacing.
I think the other thing that is important to us in telling these traumatic stories is that it is not trauma porn,
Yes.
So we're not focusing in just on, their experiences of, the worst thing that happened to them ever in their life. It's not just that. We're building out full three-dimensional, thinking, feeling characters who,
not reducing them to their
trauma.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which, by implicit comparison, plenty of true crime does that as trauma porn.
Yeah.
And also I think, well, I hate nothing more, and this is just podcasts generally, but I think probably true crime or mysteries or whatever are more guilty of it, is when, say music or sound design is so heavy-handed that you can tell people are trying to make you feel a thing.
Yeah. Because
the story, like, I feel like as a producer, you just have to trust that the story is going to make people feel a thing. And if it's not, then I don't know if maybe you should be telling a different story. Like, when I feel manipulated by a podcast, or like they're trying to manipulate my emotional state, it makes me angry.
Yeah.
And feels kind of lazy as well.
We do little things to manipulate.
Oh, little things.
Like a good chunk of pause is super important when you're doing narrative podcasting, just to give people time to process what they've just heard.
But interestingly, you're talking about keeping a pause that's in there. You're not necessarily like
elongating it.
How do you know? This is a hard thing. How do you know when a space needs to breathe, needs a pause like that?
I don't know till my quote unquote bus listens, I reckon, is when a lot of pacing stuff happens. Like, you do it in the edit, so maybe you talk first and then my bus listens come in after.
How do I know when the...
Like spacing and pacing.
When you go, oh, that's too fast, it needs a pause. What is it that clues you in that I need a pause?
I don't know.
Do you write it into the scripts? Do you know it instinctively when you see the writing?
Often I've written it into a script day as let this sit for a bit, or we need to this to
And then I think it's a musicality.
Here's where the flautist part of you comes in.
Yeah.
You can hear it.
Yeah, you can hear it. It's enough time to take a big in and out.
But we've also had to unlearn some radio habits, haven't we? Because I think, and it's a quick learn. It didn't take us that long, but I think initially things didn't have enough space because we were thinking of dead air on the radio. You can't have 2 seconds of dead air on the radio because someone will think, the radio's broken or whatever.
Right.
So I think we've
and
had
after
to...
20 seconds, the emergency music kicks in.
Does it? Does it
wow,
automatically?
that's useful to know.
Yeah. I don't think I ever had to... yes, but so when I'm writing the script, and I'm guessing you probably do it with your writing too, I'll feel where I'm like, oh, this is something that we want to just knock around in people's head for a bit or let them feel this, and that'll either be silence and space or it'll be music. Or a transition between 2 thoughts. But then often it's not until, so we'll do the edit, it'll get bounced out, and then I do what I call my bus listen, which is at the very end of the process, which is where I listen to what we've made in the context of just wherever it is that I listen to other podcasts, and I make my final notes. And so that's usually scrawled, it's on the bus or it's walking and stopping, or and it's, the notes are horrible to read, but there's so much pacing notes. There's some structure and some, this doesn't make sense, but for the most part it's, this was too quick, this needs more time. It's that stuff, and I can't feel that until I'm out in the world. And
that's when you can tell you're starting to lose the story because you start reading the billboard signs.
Exactly.
Or
taking note of those things. Or we need some more music here, or
that's
that
a good
stuff.
tip.
But it's annoying. I wish I could bring that part of my brain in earlier in the process because it's kind of annoying that it's always this last minute sweep of changes. But I think it's just how we have to do it.
Yeah, and by the time we get to the, near the end, neither of us wants to listen to it ever again.
Yeah.
And so those final listens maybe don't get done.
That's who we're looking for actually currently. We
Yeah.
need someone to listen to the thing at the very end, the final check, just in case something audio has slipped in the project and there's double up, because by that point we cannot hear it and we don't trust anyone except ourselves to properly listen.
Also, we're just hearing to all of the things that we wish we could change.
Yeah. So we need someone else to just listen through carefully and say, yes, it makes sense and it is good, and then we can send it out to iTunes or whatever. So,
sounds like a job advert.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. That's exactly what I'm doing here. Get in touch. Yeah, we'll send it to your students, but they have to listen properly.
That's right.
Or you're in trouble.
Yeah. Tell me more about that last episode. I feel like a lot of things we've been talking about kind of circle around the last episode of the lake. So the state is a psychopath is the name of episode 7. It's not actually the last one because now you have the bonus episode, right? But
such a good title. I'm so glad we got to use that.
Great fucking title. It's really good.
That's Aaron Smale's brain.
Okay. Yeah. So because this is going to be a what do you call it when you give away something?
Spoiler
alert. There's this epic moment in that episode where Aaron literally reads from the DSM-5 or 4, whichever was the latest version, the definition of a psychopath according to the manual.
Psychological manual or whatever. Yeah. The dictionary for psych stuff.
And the state absolutely
ticks every box.
Yeah. So walk us through, when did you know that became a part of the structure of the podcast? Like, when did you know? Did you know going into this story that, yes, we wanted to figure the state as a villain because that's something that's a genre of storytelling you like? Or did that emerge out of something? And what kind of work is that moment doing for you?
I think we didn't. We were unsure for a while whether we could get away with calling the state a psychopath. We knew we wanted to because Aaron had said it and had shown us those things. And we knew that it wasn't actually a big call. Like when you look at that list and look at what's happened, it's actually not, there's no stretch of the imagination required. But with the lake, we had a whole lot of legal loopholes to go through and legal checks and so. But
it also helped that the Royal Commission was going on and had already put a lot of the names and accusations and allegations on the table, in public arena. So, we were fairly safe with a lot of things. There were some names that we couldn't use, but, it made it a lot easier.
But our structure for the series was already largely in place when we approached Aaron, because he had chapters
He had some chapter headings. We rearranged that a lot.
Yeah, but
actually.
But there was some basic something there, and I'm pretty sure one of the chapter headings was the state as a psychopath, or like from that phrase was there from very early on. And I'm not sure. I think it's probably just one of those things that I think it was one of the titles for one of the concentric circles of understanding. So at the beginning, you're not sure, like, how much is the state implicated, or like, there's all these other factors. Like, anyways, it was one of those things we wanted people to land on by the end. And we just knew it was, you hear that and you're like, oh, like it's impactful. So yeah, we knew we wanted it in there, but I honestly, it's so blurry. I'm not, do you remember the moment when we were like, yes, it's in?
No, I don't. But I think it was there really early.
It's interesting that it was there early, because it's out of context. It's a wild statement to say. The state is a psychopath. Like, you can say the state is implicated in crimes, the state is blah, blah, blah. To say the state is a psychopath is really bold, but you do the work all the way through those episodes to make it so that when the listener hears it, they go, yep, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't even question it.
Yeah, you can't say it in episode 1.
No.
In episode 1, people turn off. And that we've made a justice podcast since about the justice system in Aotearoa, and that was interesting. True Justice. We were working with an advocacy organisation that already understands so deeply all the issues when it comes to policy and the institutions and all of those things. And so their impulse is to jump straight in and put it all out on the table. And the tension and the juggle that I think we did really well was to rewind and meet listeners where they were and lead them to that point.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't just jump in and be like, it's all fucked and racist and blah, blah, blah. You need to like show them all the reasons why that is true. And it was the same with that one.
Yeah. It was also quite a tricky podcast to make in terms of balancing the advocacy line that Just Speak take, and the journalism checks and balances that
for fairness
that we needed to have for to put it out on a media platform so that people would find it.
So let's talk about those tensions. So between journalism and activism and advocacy, talk about those more.
I mean, the very fact that for journalism, you really need to check people's stories. You need to, have a lot of paperwork to back things up. We needed to put things to corrections,
You need to get the other side of the story a lot.
Yeah, you needed to not put the other side of the story front and center, because that's not what Just Speak wanted to do. That's not why they wanted to make the podcast. So there was a real tension between those two things, because, going back to a person who's told their story about going through the justice system so honestly and vulnerably, and then going back and going, do you have some proof to back this up? That's such a hard thing to do.
And a lot of the time there wasn't paperwork. Like, for example, with the complaint system within corrections, people would say, if this horrible thing happened to them, then show us the complaint paperwork. But, as we've seen from later ombudsman's reports, when they go into these institutions, into the prisons, we've seen one where they had to ask people to print a complaints report. We've heard multiple reports of, what people inside prisons will talk about as like bribing away a complaint, whereas people within corrections will say, that's just us trying to like resolve it so it doesn't get to an official. So the paperwork's often missing in the first place. But yeah, you're right. Like, Just Speak, they're an advocacy organisation that are there to support people who have gone through the trauma of our justice system.
And shine a light on all of the injustices that are happening within the justice system.
Yes. Yeah, so for us to then be like, we need to check this, or we need to write a reply. We need to get basically an excuse or like a reasoning from corrections for this thing that this person went through was really hard.
Yeah.
And there were some things that we managed to, there's balance is very important, but, there's always also an argument of the importance of balance over time. And so I think you can, within a podcast, get away with, or you can, fight for it being from more from a certain point of view by saying that this other point of view has dominated for this many years and we are redressing the imbalance that has existed for this whole time. So it doesn't always need to be like 100%, 50% this, 50% balance. But you do need to, and for the audience, I think you need that as well. So it's not just coming across as like, I mean, by the end of it, you probably do want to abolish prisons or at least see a whole lot of reform, but it's not just like, like prisons are bad, let's get rid of them, which is a big call for people when they don't see any alternatives or understand the harm
So the state is a psychopath. You clearly identify the state as a psychopath in that episode. And then there's this really powerful moment where you say, man, look at what the state did. And you imagine how it would have been done from a Te Ao Māori perspective. But you don't say the state was racist. And so I was kind of curious about that. It's implied, but you don't say it. Is that part of this legal threading the needle that you're thinking about, or is that?
No, I don't think that was a consideration. I mean, if we want to say the state is racist, and I just don't think that, we needed to use those words. I mean, it's implicit from the very beginning of the series. They're taking Māori boys out of their homes, because they're brown and they're poor.
But there were so when it comes to the, because I think there were moments when I definitely joked to my family, both within Lake Alice and True Justice, that I was like, we're just trying not to get sued by corrections or like trying not to get taken down by the government. So there were, I mean, I know that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but is it like there were moments when it was like, we need to be very careful, and there were things that didn't end up in the thing because we were like, actually, that's getting us into dangerous territory.
But at the same time, I very much doubt that Corrections is going to, take a defamation case against a little old production company, or an advocacy NGO.
Yeah, right.
That's
the optics on that aren't very good.
No. So I think we probably could have got away with a lot more than we did.
Yeah.
Then we, chose not to take a chance.
The TVNZ legal team were very thorough with over thorough. I mean, in the end, great. We got to just relax and know we weren't going to be sued by anyone. But
Well, I think what's powerful about the decision not to just say, "Oh, the state's racist," and it is that instead you posited an alternative way of being, which I think was more powerful than just pointing the finger and saying bad, right?
Yeah, that is possibly my favorite part of writing in that whole podcast is Aaron's speech in the seventh episode
about Maui and
Maui
and cheeky children. You can play that in this if
you probably could if you wanted
to. We'll have to ask permission from the producing team.
Who do we need to clear that with? But anyway,
go for it.
If so, then let's do that.
We've been talking about the Crown as the parent. Well, that idea comes from a legal doctrine of parens patriae, which assumes that the Crown has the right to step in as the parent. The king is the father. But how does this sit with the Māori worldview and the Treaty of Waitangi, which says Māori never gave up rangatiratanga or autonomy over things that they hold most dear, like their children and mokopuna? In reports from early European settlers in Aotearoa, traders, artists, missionaries and explorers, they talk a lot about Māori children and how they were indulged. They weren't physically punished. But the settlers didn't understand that this leniency came about from the fact that children were expected to mess things up in te ao Māori. There's a whakatauki that goes, ko te mahi a te tamariki, he wāwahi taha. It means it is the job of children to break the calabash. The proverb is a rebuke to adults. Get over it. Kids are meant to make mistakes. It's how they learn. It's no big deal. The Māori word haututu means mischief. I think it's also where we get the saying tutu fingers. Sometimes it's said with exasperation, but also admiration. Go through any Māori tribal history, and the heroes are the troublemakers, the mavericks. Think about Maui, the trickster, the greatest Polynesian hero of all. A child who was born premature and cast out, only to rise to legendary status. Maui was a delinquent, but he's also a hero. It's all too easy to see what might have happened to Maui if he were born in Aotearoa in the 1960s or 70s, how his behaviour might have been corrected by Pākehā experts who felt they knew better. It's just as easy to see how things might have turned out differently for kids like Rangi or Tyrone if they'd been born into an Aotearoa that didn't yet know colonisation. How their energy might have been guided in a direction that benefited their communities. How their initiative and leadership skills might have been celebrated, their voices heard. Sure, they might have been told off, but they would have also been held. They would have been loved.
But yeah, it was so powerful. And, that was all Aaron. Like, a lot of the script was so collaborative.
It was not. It was mostly Aaron.
Well, no, I don't think so. Like, we had to teach a long-form journalist, like old school paper journalist, how to write for the ear, how to write for radio, and how to read, simplify things, and how to
read like he wasn't reading a news bulletin. Yeah.
So there were all these things that we definitely collaborated really hard on. But by the 7th episode, he was like a duck in water.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how does that work? When you've been coaching podcasters on writing for the ear, what kinds of strategies do you encourage them to embrace?
Well, first we write it for the ear. So I will often...
Write it the way we talk it.
Yeah, you write it the way you speak. So you write anything, write it the way we...
Do you voice to text?
We write it the way we talk it. No, but I will... But I will imagine, like so maybe the sentences, and then I turned around and considered my outlook or whatever, and you're like, but you're not even going to say that to a human. So it's like, and then I turned around and had a look, like it's just going... My script is always written largely for the eye at first, and then it's just combing over it and finding the words that I wouldn't naturally say to someone that I was talking to and changing it. And when you're working with someone else, it's doing that, but then passing it over to them to put it in their words and just making sure they, keep the key points there, but are otherwise putting it in their voice. Often you get to the studio though, and there's still those things that you just, and then it's, so with Aaron, there was a bit of me sitting in the studio silently with him, and occasionally when he got stuck on his script and was just reading it and it sounded red, getting him to just look at the script and see what he was trying to say and then look at me and tell me. That's a really good one. Look at a person and tell them.
So internalize what's written.
Yeah. What have you got to hit? And then tell me.
And I'm with a live audience, a silent but live audience
a silent,
in the studio
single
with
live
you.
audience. Yeah. And that is that's like when I was doing the Bang narration, part of the secret was a shot of tequila.
Excellent.
For just a bit of confidence. And then the rest, and I've since weaned myself off, I can do it without it, but the rest was sitting and locking eyes with someone and telling them. And if they, were like, oh, I'm not sure, then telling them again. Yeah.
Okay.
And looking away from your script. These things have to be so fully scripted. We're not dealing with bullet points really for the narrative stuff. It's proper script, and it's really hard to read something like you're not reading something. Yeah. So,
but I think, little tips like reading ahead, keeping your sentences short, not using words that you wouldn't use in conversation. Little things like that. Breathing's good.
Breathing. Do you mark your breaths?
I think I will. I definitely remember, because I remember Aaron being like, "Why are you using so many?" I can't remember. Are they M dashes or something? Like, there's something about the formatting that I do in my scripting to show a pause or to break sentences up, or which isn't, if it was written, would be nonsensical. And it took a while for him to get into the, there's like code, there's shorthand.
Yes. Within
my scripting of that breaks the sentences down for reading.
I think we even bolded words, so
bolding
that he would emphasize the right ones.
For sure.
Right.
And then also we in the studio for these kinds of things we'll read off of the back of the audio, so it'll play into his ears what he's responding to, because so that he can, and this is
respond naturally.
It takes time is the thing. Like if you're short on time, it can be hard to do that. But you want to, if someone says something funny, you want a little bit of a smile in your voice after it, or you need to be and hitting, or if someone says something sad and you come in like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Like it's just, you got to match your tone.
Yeah.
So
and so you're talking about you play the tape as you've got your script with your tape and your narration. You're literally doing playback the tape as into the transition of then speak and record the narration.
So
That's brilliant.
We hit record, play the end, and then we're rolling.
Yeah. So you have to have that all written out.
Yeah, so if somebody is saying something really heavy, there's nothing better than an actual natural pause before the narrator comes in.
Where you can even hear the breath sometimes.
Yeah, and the effect
and
that it's had on their heart, you know?
Yeah. It was good, those moments when we got Aaron to, that's probably putting too much credit on us, but when his voice would break up, or, you know, when he really hit that emotion, were pretty amazing.
Well done. Good writing.
Well, yeah. I mean, he, as you say, he was, it's amazing how quickly he picked that up, and how incredible he was at it all by the end. Yeah.
So tell us, what are you working on now? What stories do you want to point us to?
Yeah, so we have just kicked off production for a series called The Good Sex Project, which we'll be putting out through Stuff
and Re
News in May 2023. It's a spin-off of Bang.
I was going to ask, how is it related for Bang listeners? What is this?
I think if you loved Bang, you will love this. It's building upon, but for people who haven't listened to Bang, it'll be also a great intro to it. It's just similar in format in that I'm just talking to people about their sex and love lives, and really intimate interviews. I think the kind of things you often don't hear, and my favorite conversations to have with, you know, couples and then just individuals who may be struggling with something, or you know, a lot of the time there's shame or embarrassment, and just getting that all out so we can all feel normal and able to share with our friends and feel supported. And then also the other part of it is jumping in with experts and getting like basically free access to like a sex therapist who can help us all steer through that stuff. And the premise, I guess, is that sex and relationships are a huge part of so many of our lives, most of our lives, and we are given no education on how to navigate them. I mean, especially sex ed is starting to catch up, but relationships and what makes a healthy relationship, and when it's time to quit, and when it's time to just dig in and get through this bit, all that stuff, I think we get so how to communicate, we get little information on. So good sex, good relationships, how to have them and how to hold on to them.
Fantastic. And is this a story that's unique to the podcasting medium in that the identities will be anonymous?
Yeah. So it'll be like that was
but the voices are
with
there.
Bang as well. Yeah. So I think people they use pseudonyms. You might recognize their voices maybe.
If you know them.
If you know them, that has happened. But no one's had a negative experience from that so far. Yes, and I think you don't need the names. What you need is that intimacy that podcasting in particular is so good at, when you have somebody just right there inside your brain sharing their story, and you can't help but feel the feelings they're feeling. You know, that's the important bit. We don't need to know their identity. And so especially brave people, or people who have been able to be open with others in their lives, might use their names, but it's just, I think it's negligible, really. I don't think there's any real need for it. Yeah, it's the stories that are important.
But it sounds like a kind of story that podcasting is perfect for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think you could do it as easily for the screen. And for Re News, we're making some videos that are kind of more targeted young about consent. Another great one about the clitoris, which I'd love to tell you all about, but you can wait for the video. And sex advice for my teen self from some cool celebs.
Right.
And other than that, we're working with a couple of women, Matilda Green and Art Green, who won The Bachelor many years ago and have since had 2 kids, and Hannah Davison, who writes, personalized children's books. So they have a kind of parenting podcast, which is going to come out probably early next year. We're working with them to edit it. It's not really about parenting. It's more about parenting the parent.
It's called Untidy.
Other than that, we're working on a few pitches and, just sifting through our ideas, and we're totally open to anybody who wants to collaborate.
Right.
Just flick us an email, popsockmedia@gmail.com.
Thank you.